The wind carved through the alpine valley with surgical precision, carrying the scent of snow and pine across the jagged peaks. At 12,000 feet above sea level, the air bit sharp against exposed skin, and every breath felt like swallowing ice. The observation post had been carved into the granite face of Mount Kestrel 3 days prior, a shallow depression barely wide enough for one person, camouflaged with local stone and weathered canvas that matched the mountain's natural texture perfectly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena Vasquez had not moved for 14 hours. Her body had become part of the mountain itself, every muscle fiber locked in controlled tension, spine curved against the natural contours of the rock face. The ghillie suit she wore was handcrafted for this specific terrain, woven with threads pulled from local vegetation and treated with mineral dust that matched the granite's pale gray undertones. Even her breathing had synchronized with the mountain's rhythm, shallow inhalations that barely disturbed the fabric across her chest. The rifle rested in a custom-built cradle, its barrel extending through a gap in the camouflage netting. The weapon had been modified extensively for extreme altitude operations. Extended barrel, specialized bolt assembly rated for temperature fluctuations, and a scope housing that could maintain zero accuracy despite the brutal mountain conditions. The stock was wrapped in paracord at precise intervals to prevent metal-on-metal contact that might create unwanted sound. Through the scope's lens, the valley spread below like a tactical map rendered in living detail. The target compound sat nestled against the southern slope, a collection of reinforced structures built into the mountainside itself. Intelligence reports had identified it as a high-value extraction point, a place where certain people disappeared from official records and reemerged with new identities. The kind of facility that existed in the spaces between governments, funded by shadows and operated by ghosts. Elena's left eye remained pressed against the scope while her right stayed closed, a technique that prevented eye strain during extended observation periods. Her vision had adapted to the magnification, allowing her to read the smallest details across the impossible distance. A guard's cigarette ember glowing in the pre-dawn darkness, the frost pattern on a vehicle's windshield, the way morning mist clung to the compound's outer walls like protective veils. The mission parameters were elegant in their simplicity. Watch, wait, confirm target presence, execute on command, no backup, no extraction guaranteed. The kind of assignment that appeared in files marked with classifications so high they barely existed on paper. Elena had drawn these missions before, back when her name appeared on operational rosters and her call sign meant something to the people who mattered. But that was before Sarajevo, before the betrayal that left 12 good people dead in her reputation buried under classified reports that painted her as a rogue operator who had lost her nerve at the critical moment. Before she became a ghost in her own military, technically alive but operationally dead, assigned to missions so far off the official books that success or failure would never be acknowledged. The communication device clipped to her vest had remained silent for the past 6 hours. Standard protocol for deep cover operations. No chatter unless absolutely necessary. No status reports unless requested. The silence was supposed to be comforting, a sign that everything was proceeding according to plan. Instead, it felt like being buried alive, cut off from the world of the living by layers of bureaucracy and betrayal. Elena shifted her weight by millimeters, a movement so subtle that even trained observers would have missed it. Her legs had gone numb hours ago, but she had learned to work around the discomfort, redirecting her focus to the parts of her body that still responded with precision. Her trigger finger remained relaxed along the guard, never touching the mechanism itself. Muscle memory from 1,000 training sessions reminded her that the finger was not part of the weapon until the moment of decision arrived. The scope's reticle remained steady on the compound's main entrance. Intelligence suggested that high-value targets typically moved through that particular doorway during morning transitions, when the guard shifts changed and visual surveillance was at its weakest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena had memorized the timing patterns, the subtle rhythms that governed life in places like this. Even the most careful operators fell into routines when they thought no one was watching. A movement caught her attention, barely visible through the pre-dawn gloom. Someone was approaching the compound from the eastern trail, moving with the careful gait of a person navigating treacherous terrain in low light. Elena adjusted her focus, bringing the figure into sharper resolution. Male, average height, wearing civilian clothes that had been selected for their ability to blend into the mountain environment. He carried no visible weapons, but his posture suggested military training underneath the carefully casual exterior. The man paused at the compound's outer perimeter, exchanging brief words with someone Elena could not see clearly. A moment later, the main door opened from inside, revealing a slice of warm interior light that was quickly extinguished as the visitor stepped through. The entire interaction lasted less than 30 seconds, but Elena filed away every detail for later analysis. The way he moved, the deference shown by the unseen guard, the casual confidence that came from someone who belonged in places where others feared to tread. Her communication device vibrated once against her vest, a barely perceptible pulse that indicated an incoming transmission. Elena did not move to check it immediately. Protocol demanded that she maintain visual contact with the target area until the immediate observation window had closed. The message would wait. In operations like this, patience was not just a virtue but a survival skill that separated the living from the dead. The mountain's silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through stone crevices and the distant cry of a hawk circling somewhere far above. Elena had grown accustomed to the isolation, the way extended periods of motionless observation created a kind of meditative state where time moved differently. Hours could pass like minutes, or minutes could stretch into eternities, depending on the level of threat and the proximity of the target. She thought about the briefing that had brought her to this mountain, delivered in a windowless room at a facility that did not officially exist. The briefing officer had been someone she did not recognize, a woman with silver hair and eyes that revealed nothing about her thoughts or intentions. The target profile had been sparse, almost deliberately vague. A name, a photograph, a classification level that required additional clearances just to view. The kind of mission that usually ended with someone disappearing from all official records, as if they had never existed at all. Elena had accepted the assignment without question, not because she trusted the system that had betrayed her, but because she understood that some missions transcended personal grievances. There were threats that moved in the spaces between nations, people who wielded power that could destabilize entire regions if left unchecked. Her personal feelings about the military hierarchy were irrelevant when measured against the potential consequences of failure. The scope's image remained steady despite the mounting wind that swept across the mountain's exposed faces. Elena had compensated for the atmospheric conditions, adjusting her calculations to account for air density, temperature variations, and the subtle ways that altitude affected bullet trajectory. The mathematics of long-range precision were unforgiving, requiring perfect integration of environmental factors, equipment limitations, and human skill. A single miscalculation could turn a perfect shot into a catastrophic miss. Another figure emerged from the compound's interior, this one moving with obvious urgency. Elena tracked the person through her scope, noting the quick, nervous gestures that suggested either fear or excitement. The individual was smaller than the previous visitor, possibly female, though the distance and lighting made definitive identification difficult. She moved toward a vehicle parked near the compound's western wall, fumbling with what appeared to be communication equipment. Elena's pulse remained steady, her breathing controlled despite the increasing activity below. This was the kind of moment that separated professional snipers from enthusiastic amateurs. The ability to remain calm while multiple variables shifted simultaneously, maintaining focus on the primary objective while processing secondary information that might prove critical later. Her training had been built around scenarios exactly like this, where patience and precision were the only tools available against overwhelming uncertainty. The communication device pulsed again, more insistently this time. Elena allowed herself a single glance at the display, reading the brief message that appeared in green text against the black background. Priority update. Maintain position. Target confirmed inbound. ETA unknown. The message disappeared after 5 seconds, leaving no trace of its existence on the device's memory banks. Elena returned her attention to the scope, tracking the continued activity around the compound. More people were moving now, some with obvious purpose, others seeming to react to instructions being passed along through invisible channels. The early morning routine was being disrupted by something that had not been part of the original intelligence assessments. Elena filed this discrepancy away for later consideration, knowing that unexpected changes often revealed more about a target's true nature than hours of careful observation. The temperature had dropped several degrees since she first established the observation post, and frost was beginning to form on the exposed metal surfaces of her equipment. Elena had prepared for this contingency, treating all critical components with anti-freeze compounds that would prevent moisture from compromising their function. The ghillie suit's outer layer had been waterproofed with materials that would not crack or become brittle in extreme cold, maintaining the camouflage's effectiveness even as the mountain's weather turned hostile. A sound drifted up from the valley below, too faint and distorted by distance to identify immediately. Elena increased the scope's magnification, scanning the compound's perimeter for the source of the disturbance. She located it near the main gate, where 2 guards were engaged in what appeared to be an animated discussion. One was gesturing toward the eastern trail, while the other kept checking his watch with obvious impatience. Their body language suggested disagreement about something that neither considered trivial. Elena's mind processed the implications automatically, running through the tactical possibilities that might explain the guard's behavior. A delayed arrival, a change in scheduling, a security concern that had not been anticipated by the mission. Planners. Each scenario carried different risks and opportunities, requiring constant recalibration of her own position and readiness state. The ability to adapt to changing circumstances without losing sight of the primary objective was what distinguished elite operatives from merely competent ones. The hawk she had heard earlier came into view, circling high above the valley on thermals that rose from the sun-warmed rocks below. Elena watched it for a moment, appreciating the bird's effortless mastery of its environment. The hawk's hunting strategy was not unlike her own: patience, observation, and the ability to strike with perfect timing when the opportunity presented itself. The comparison was not lost on her, though she found no particular comfort in the similarity. Her water supply was running low, a fact she noted without concern. The mission parameters had accounted for extended observation periods, and she carried sufficient reserves to maintain peak performance for another 18 hours if necessary. Dehydration was a more serious threat than hunger in environments like this, where the thin air and extreme cold could drain the body's moisture reserves with surprising speed. Elena had learned to manage her consumption carefully, taking small sips at regular intervals to maintain hydration without creating the need for movement that might compromise her position. The scope's image sharpened as the morning sun climbed higher, reducing the thermal distortions that had plagued her vision during the pre-dawn hours. Elena could now make out individual faces among the people moving around the compound, though none matched the target profile she had memorized during the mission briefing. The activity level continued to increase, suggesting that whatever event had disrupted the morning routine was approaching its culmination. A vehicle appeared on the eastern trail, moving slowly along the narrow path that wound down from the mountain's higher elevations. Elena tracked its progress through the scope, noting the deliberate pace that suggested either mechanical limitations or extreme caution about the terrain. The vehicle was unmarked, painted in colors that would blend with the natural environment, though its purpose was clearly utilitarian rather than recreational. The compound's guards had taken notice of the approaching vehicle, their posture shifting from casual alertness to focused attention. Elena could see weapons being checked, communication equipment activated, and positioning that suggested preparation for either welcoming important visitors or repelling an unwelcome intrusion. The distinction would become clear soon enough, depending on how the arrival was received. Elena's breathing remained controlled despite the increasing tension of the situation. This was the kind of moment that missions were built around, when hours of patient observation culminated in brief periods of intense activity. Her finger remained clear of the trigger, but her body was fully prepared for the possibility of immediate action. The scope's crosshairs remained steady on the compound's main entrance, ready to shift to any target that presented itself within the predetermined engagement parameters. The vehicle reached the compound's outer perimeter and stopped. Elena adjusted her scope's focus, bringing the scene into maximum resolution. The driver remained in the vehicle for several moments, apparently engaged in conversation with someone else in the passenger compartment. Their faces were not visible from Elena's elevated position, but their body language suggested careful coordination rather than casual interaction. The compound's main door opened, revealing several figures that Elena had not seen before. They moved with the careful precision of people who understood that their environment might contain threats, checking angles and maintaining spacing that would minimize their vulnerability to attack. Elena recognized the techniques from her own training, though the execution was somewhat less polished than what she would have expected from truly elite operatives. One of the vehicle's doors opened, and a figure stepped out onto the compound's forecourt. Elena's scope tracked the movement automatically, bringing the person into sharp focus within the reticle's frame. The individual was tall, moving with confidence that suggested familiarity with the location and the people waiting to receive them. Elena began the mental process of comparing the figure to her target profile, analyzing height, build, movement patterns, and any visible distinctive features. The comparison process was interrupted by a sudden shift in her scope's image as the figure turned directly toward her observation position. For a moment that seemed to stretch beyond normal time, Elena found herself looking at a face that she recognized from contexts far removed from this mountain mission. The features were older, marked by years and experiences that had not been part of the original intelligence files, but the fundamental structure was unmistakable. Elena's training prevented her from revealing any external reaction to the recognition. But internally, her tactical assessment shifted completely. The target was not who the mission briefing had indicated. The person standing in the compound's forecourt was someone whose official existence had ended 3 years ago in a classified incident that had been buried so deeply that even the rumors had eventually died away. Someone whose death had been confirmed by multiple sources and whose funeral had been attended by senior officials who would not have made such gestures for a fabricated loss. The implications began cascading through Elena's mind as she maintained visual contact through the scope. If the target was alive, then the intelligence that had supported their supposed death was either incomplete or deliberately falsified. If they were operating from this mountain compound, then they were either being held against their will or had chosen to remain hidden from the systems that had once claimed their loyalty. Either scenario suggested complications that extended far beyond the original mission parameters. Elena's communication device remained silent, offering no guidance about how to proceed when the fundamental assumptions of a mission proved to be incorrect. She was trained to adapt to changing circumstances, but this level of deviation from the briefing materials required decisions that might have consequences extending far beyond her own survival. The scope's crosshairs remained centered on the target, awaiting the command that would transform observation into action. The target moved closer to the compound's main entrance, engaging in conversation with the figures that had emerged to meet them. Elena could not hear the words being exchanged, but the body language suggested familiarity and mutual respect rather than the tension that might accompany a prisoner's movements or the deference that would be shown to someone under coercion. The interaction appeared voluntary, though the remote location and defensive preparations suggested that the target's presence was not without risk. Elena's mind worked through the tactical possibilities as she maintained her vigil through the scope. The target's apparent cooperation with the compound's personnel did not necessarily indicate guilt or innocence regarding whatever events had led to their official death. People survived by adapting to circumstances beyond their control, and 3 years was sufficient time for relationships and loyalties to shift in response to changing realities. The truth might be considerably more complex than the simple elimination mission that had brought Elena to this mountain. The morning sun continued its climb across the alpine sky, casting sharp shadows that changed the visual dynamics of the compound below. Elena adjusted her scope settings to compensate for the increased contrast, maintaining optimal image clarity despite the changing light conditions. Her position remained uncompromised, the camouflage holding perfectly against the mountains. Granite backdrop. As far as anyone in the compound was aware, they were unobserved and secure in their remote sanctuary. But Elena was watching, recording every detail in her trained memory, waiting for the command that would determine whether this mission ended in completion or in the kind of complications that created new missions for other operatives in the years to come. The target remained alive, apparently well, and engaged in activities that might or might not represent a threat to the interests that had sent Elena to this mountain. The scope's crosshairs remained steady, ready to deliver judgment when the moment arrived. The communication device pulsed once more against her vest, carrying instructions that would soon determine the fate of everyone in the valley below. The granite face of Mount Kestrel had been carved by millennia of wind and weather, creating natural handholds and concealment opportunities that military planners could never have designed. Elena Vasquez pressed her back against the stone, feeling its cold permanence through the layers of specialized fabric that comprised her ghillie suit. The mountain demanded respect, and she gave it willingly, knowing that survival at this altitude required perfect integration with an environment that killed the unprepared without malice or mercy. Her observation post overlooked a valley that existed in the spaces between official maps, a place where geography became deliberately vague and satellite imagery was classified beyond the reach of casual inquiry. The compound below had been constructed with the kind of resources that governments preferred not to acknowledge, built into the mountainside itself, so that aerial reconnaissance would reveal nothing more than natural rock formations and the occasional glint of what might be mineral deposits or might be carefully positioned reflective surfaces. Elena had been watching the compound for 3 days, documenting patterns of movement, cataloging personnel, and building the kind of comprehensive intelligence picture that formed the foundation of successful operations. Her notes, recorded on waterproof paper with a pencil that would function regardless of temperature extremes, filled a small notebook that would be destroyed immediately after mission completion. The information existed nowhere except in her memory and these temporary records, making her the sole repository of intelligence that had cost considerable resources to acquire. The target compound operated according to schedules that revealed careful security planning. Guard rotations occurred at irregular intervals, preventing the establishment of predictable patterns that hostile observers might exploit. Vehicle movements followed routes that maximized natural concealment while providing multiple escape options in case of compromise. Communications were conducted through equipment that generated no electromagnetic signatures detectable by standard surveillance. Methods. The overall impression was of an organization that understood the importance of remaining invisible to official scrutiny. Elena's equipment had been selected specifically for extended mountain operations, each item chosen for its ability to function reliably in conditions that would disable standard military gear. Her rifle was a custom-built weapon designed for extreme accuracy at distances that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. Its barrel machined to tolerances measured in fractions of thousandths of inches. The scope mounted above it represented the pinnacle of optical engineering, capable of resolving details that would be invisible to the naked eye even at much shorter ranges. The ghillie suit she wore had been handcrafted using materials gathered from this specific mountain range, ensuring perfect camouflage integration with the local environment. Every thread had been treated with compounds that eliminated infrared signatures, prevented ultraviolet fluorescence, and resisted the moisture that could turn effective camouflage into a liability. The suit's construction allowed for natural movement of air across her body, preventing the heat buildup that might create detectable thermal anomalies to enemy sensors. Her position had been selected using topographical analysis that accounted for factors invisible to casual observation. Wind patterns, thermal currents, shadow movements throughout the day, potential counter-sniper positions, and escape routes had all been evaluated and integrated into a comprehensive assessment of tactical advantages and vulnerabilities. Elena occupied the optimal point within a three-dimensional matrix of possibilities, located where mathematics and experience intersected to create the perfect balance of concealment, observation capability, and engagement effectiveness. The mission briefing had been delivered in a facility that did not appear on any organizational charts, located beneath layers of bureaucracy so dense that even its existence was compartmentalized beyond normal security protocols. The briefing officer had been a woman whose credentials Elena was not cleared to know, though her manner suggested familiarity with operations that occurred in the spaces between official acknowledgement and practical necessity. The target profile had been presented without context, a collection of data points that formed a picture without revealing the larger canvas on which it was painted. Elena had studied the target's photograph until every detail was burned into her memory. Height, weight, distinguishing marks, movement patterns, preferred clothing styles, and behavioral tendencies that might make identification possible, even at extreme range. The psychological profile suggested someone with military training who had adapted to civilian environments, retaining the situational awareness and physical conditioning of professional operators, while adopting the surface characteristics of ordinary citizenship. The kind of person who could disappear into crowds or emerge from wilderness areas with equal facility. The classification level attached to the mission files was so high that Elena's clearance had required additional documentation and approval processes that she had never encountered before. Someone with significant authority had decided that this particular target represented a threat worthy of extraordinary measures, though the specific nature of that threat remained classified beyond her level of access. Elena had learned to work with incomplete information, understanding that operational security sometimes required compartmentalization even among trusted personnel. Her communication equipment maintained contact with command through encrypted channels that bounced signals off commercial satellites, disguising military traffic as routine. Data transmissions that would attract no special attention from monitoring stations operated by hostile intelligence services. The messages she received were brief and cryptic, providing updates on mission status without revealing information that might compromise other operations if intercepted. Elena acknowledged receipt of instructions through coded responses that confirmed her position and readiness without transmitting details that enemies might find useful. The mountain's weather patterns had been studied extensively during mission planning, though Elena knew that meteorological predictions became increasingly unreliable at extreme altitudes where local conditions could change with lethal speed. She had prepared for temperature variations that could span 40 degrees within a few hours, wind conditions that might make precision shooting impossible, and precipitation that could compromise both visibility and equipment function. Her survival gear included redundant systems for every critical capability, ensuring that mission completion would not depend on the continued function of any single piece of equipment. Elena's physical conditioning had been developed specifically for the demands of extended mountain operations, combining cardiovascular endurance with the kind of muscular control that allowed for motionless observation periods that could stretch beyond normal human limits. Her training regimen included meditation techniques that helped manage the psychological stress of isolation, breathing exercises that optimized oxygen utilization at high altitude, and mental conditioning that maintained focus despite the physical discomfort that inevitably accompanied missions conducted in hostile environments. The scope's magnification brought the distant compound into intimate detail, allowing Elena to observe individual conversations despite the impossible distance that separated her position from the target area. She had learned to read lips in multiple languages, a skill that proved invaluable when audio surveillance was not feasible. Body language analysis provided additional intelligence about the emotional states and relationship dynamics of the people she observed, often revealing information that verbal communications might deliberately conceal. The compound's defensive preparations were sophisticated but not ostentatious, designed to repel serious threats without advertising the location's true importance to casual observers. Elena had identified weapon emplacements that covered all approach routes, communication equipment that could summon reinforcements from unknown locations, and early warning systems that would detect intruders long before they posed immediate threats. The people responsible for this facility understood the difference between security theater and genuine protection against determined adversaries. Elena's own background had prepared her for missions that existed in the gray areas between official military operations and the kind of activities that governments preferred to conduct through intermediaries. Her service record included assignments that would never be acknowledged publicly, successes that had prevented conflicts that never made headlines, and failures that had been buried so deeply that even the participants sometimes questioned whether they had actually occurred. She was part of a community of professionals whose work made normal life possible for people who would never know their names or understand their sacrifices. The betrayal that had ended her official career had been engineered by people who understood exactly which pressure points would cause maximum damage to her reputation and future prospects. False intelligence, manipulated evidence, and testimony from sources whose credibility could not be challenged without revealing classified methods had combined to create a narrative of incompetence and insubordination that destroyed her standing within the military hierarchy. Elena had been offered the choice between a court-martial that might result in imprisonment or resignation from active duty with benefits intact but career prospects eliminated. She had chosen resignation, understanding that fighting the charges would require revealing information that might compromise other operations and endanger personnel whose safety was more important than her personal vindication. The decision had cost her everything that mattered professionally, transforming her from a respected operator into a cautionary tale about the dangers of exceeding authorized parameters. Her former colleagues had distanced themselves from her with the speed that characterized people who understood that association with the disgraced could be professionally fatal. The transition to contractor status had been managed through intermediaries who specialized in finding employment for personnel whose official careers had ended under circumstances that made conventional retirement impossible. Elena's skills remained valuable to organizations that operated outside normal bureaucratic constraints, though her new employers were considerably less concerned with protocol and considerably more interested in results that could not be achieved through official channels. The work paid better than military service, but it came with risks that extended far beyond physical danger. Elena had adapted to her new circumstances with the same methodical precision that characterized her approach to complex tactical problems. She had established new identities, developed alternative skill sets that complemented her military training, and built relationships with people whose loyalty was measured in professional competence rather than institutional allegiance. The underground community of former military specialists provided its own support networks and information-sharing systems, creating informal structures that often proved more reliable than official channels. Her current assignment had come through channels that maintained plausible deniability for everyone involved, presented as a consultation opportunity that would utilize her unique qualifications without creating official records that might complicate future operations. The target had been described as a former military officer whose current activities posed potential threats to national security interests, though the specific nature of those threats remained classified beyond Elena's clearance level. The mission parameters were simple: locate, observe, and eliminate on command. Elena understood that missions like this one existed because certain problems could not be solved through conventional legal or military channels. The target had somehow moved beyond the reach of normal accountability mechanisms, requiring the kind of direct action that democratic institutions preferred to conduct through intermediaries whose connection to official policy could be plausibly denied. Elena's role was to serve as that intermediary, accepting personal responsibility for actions that served broader interests while protecting the institutions that employed her from the political consequences of those actions. The moral complexities of such arrangements were not lost on Elena, but she had made peace with the contradictions long ago. Democracy required protection from threats that could not be addressed through democratic processes, and that protection sometimes demanded actions that could not be acknowledged publicly. Elena viewed herself as a necessary component of systems that allowed normal people to live normal lives, without confronting the darker realities that existed at the margins of civilized society. Her work might be morally ambiguous, but its ultimate purpose was the preservation of values that she continued to believe were worth defending. The scope's image remained steady despite the mounting wind that swept across the mountain's exposed faces, and Elena made minute adjustments to compensate for the atmospheric disturbances that could affect bullet trajectory over such extreme distances. The mathematics of long-range precision shooting were complex enough under ideal conditions, becoming exponentially more challenging when environmental factors created multiple variables that had to be calculated and integrated in real time. Elena had developed an intuitive understanding of these relationships through years of practice and experience, though she continued to rely on mechanical aids and precise measurements whenever possible. Her position commanded a view of the entire valley, allowing her to monitor all approaches to the target compound while maintaining concealment that would defeat even sophisticated counter-surveillance efforts. The elevation advantage provided tactical benefits that could not be replicated at ground level, though it also created challenges related to atmospheric density, wind patterns, and the extended lines of communication that connected her position to command authorities. Elena had weighed these factors carefully during mission planning, concluding that the advantages outweighed the disadvantages for this particular operation. The target compound's daily routine had been documented in detail over the 3 days of observation, revealing patterns that suggested careful security planning, combined with the kind of institutional habits that developed when groups of people lived and worked together over extended periods. Elena had identified the times when guard changes created brief vulnerabilities, the locations where natural cover could be exploited by potential intruders, and the communication protocols that coordinated activities between different areas of the facility. This intelligence would prove valuable regardless of how the current mission developed. Elena's mental state had been carefully managed throughout the observation period, using techniques developed specifically for extended solo operations in hostile environments. Isolation, physical discomfort, and the constant stress of remaining alert for threats that might never materialize could degrade psychological function in ways that compromised mission effectiveness. Elena had learned to compartmentalize these stresses, maintaining operational focus while acknowledging the emotional costs that would require attention after mission completion. The communication device clipped to her vest had remained silent for several hours, a condition that could indicate either smooth mission progression or communication system failure. Elena had redundant contact methods available, though using them would increase her electromagnetic signature and potentially compromise her position if hostile forces were conducting counter-surveillance operations. The decision about when to initiate alternative contact protocols required balancing the need for information against the risks associated with revealing her presence to potential enemies. Elena's equipment maintenance routine had been performed with obsessive attention to detail, ensuring that every critical system remained functional despite the harsh environmental conditions that could cause failures in equipment that had not been properly prepared. Her rifle's moving parts had been lubricated with compounds that remained effective at extreme temperatures, while optical surfaces had been treated to prevent fogging and ice formation that could degrade image quality. At critical moments, the scope's internal mechanisms had been tested and calibrated repeatedly, guaranteeing accuracy that would not drift despite the thermal cycling caused by day-night temperature variations. The ghillie suit's camouflage effectiveness had been verified using photographic analysis that simulated the visual characteristics of optical devices that enemies might use for surveillance. Elena had positioned herself within backgrounds that would defeat thermal imaging, conventional photography, and the kind of movement detection algorithms employed by automated surveillance systems. Her heat signature was masked by the suit's thermal properties, while her electromagnetic emissions were minimized through careful selection of equipment that generated no detectable radiation. Elena's physical positioning had been optimized for the kind of extended observation period that the mission demanded, with careful attention to preventing muscle fatigue and joint stiffness that could degrade performance when immediate action became necessary. Her spine remained aligned with the natural contours of the rock face, distributing weight evenly while maintaining the kind of muscular tension that would allow for smooth transition from observation to engagement mode. Her breathing remained controlled and regular, optimizing oxygen distribution while preventing the kind of carbon dioxide buildup that could cause concentration problems during extended periods of limited movement. The target compound's personnel had been cataloged according to their apparent roles and responsibilities, though Elena understood that appearances could be deliberately misleading when dealing with people who had professional reasons to conceal their true capabilities and intentions. The guards moved with the kind of situational awareness that suggested military training, though their equipment and techniques indicated civilian contractors rather than active duty personnel. The support staff appeared to be genuine civilians, though their presence in such a remote and secured facility suggested either specialized skills or knowledge that made them valuable enough to justify the considerable expense of maintaining them in such isolation. Elena's mission training had included extensive preparation for the psychological challenges associated with targeting individuals whose personal characteristics might evoke empathy or hesitation in less disciplined operators. She had learned to compartmentalize the human aspects of targets while maintaining focus on the tactical requirements of mission completion. The people she observed through her scope were not individuals with families and personal histories, but rather components of a threat assessment that required specific responses based on predetermined criteria established by authority figures, whose access to classified intelligence exceeded her own. The scope's crosshairs remained centered on the compound's main entrance, ready to track any target that presented itself according to the mission parameters she had memorized. Elena's trigger finger remained clear of the weapon's firing mechanism, positioned according to safety protocols that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. The decision to transition from observation to engagement would be made by command authorities who possessed information that she was not cleared to access, though the ultimate responsibility for precise execution would rest with her professional skills and personal judgment. Elena's understanding of the broader strategic context remained deliberately limited, a compartmentalization that protected both operational security and her own psychological well-being. She knew that the target represented some form of threat to interests that her superiors considered worth protecting through lethal force, but the specific nature of that threat was classified beyond her access level. This arrangement allowed her to focus on the tactical aspects of mission completion, while avoiding the kind of moral complexity that could interfere with split-second decision-making when lives depended on immediate action. The mountain's silence was broken only by the whisper of wind through stone crevices and the distant cry of predator birds that hunted in the alpine wilderness. Elena had grown accustomed to the profound quiet that characterized high-altitude environments, finding that the absence of human-generated noise enhanced her ability to detect subtle changes in the compound's activity patterns. Her hearing had been trained to distinguish between natural sounds and the artificial noises that indicated human presence, allowing her to maintain awareness of her surroundings without relying solely on visual observation. The morning sun continued its climb across the alpine sky, creating shadow patterns that would shift throughout the day and potentially affect both observation conditions and tactical opportunities. Elena had calculated the timing of these changes during mission planning, ensuring that her position would remain concealed while maintaining optimal sightlines to all critical areas of the target compound. The interplay between light, shadow, and terrain created a constantly evolving tactical environment that required continuous assessment and adaptation. Elena's water and food supplies had been calculated to sustain peak performance for the maximum anticipated mission duration, with additional reserves to handle unexpected delays or complications. Her metabolism had been conditioned through specialized training to operate efficiently on limited nutrition, while maintaining the kind of physical and mental acuity that mission success required. The discipline of managing basic biological needs, while maintaining operational focus, was part of the professional skill set that distinguished elite operators from merely competent ones. The communication device pulsed once more against Elena's vest, indicating an incoming priority transmission that would provide either the execute command she had been waiting for, or new intelligence that might change the fundamental parameters of her mission. Elena maintained visual contact with the compound while preparing to receive instructions that might determine the fate of everyone in the valley below, including herself. The scope's crosshairs remained steady, awaiting the moment when observation would transform into action, and when the careful preparation of the past 3 days would culminate in a few seconds that would determine success or failure. The fluorescent lights in Conference Room Delta cast harsh shadows across the polished table where Elena's career would be dissected with surgical precision. The room smelled of industrial disinfectant and the kind of recycled air that circulated through government buildings designed more for security than comfort. Elena sat with her spine straight, hands folded in her lap, while 3 officers she had never seen before reviewed files that contained her entire professional life reduced to data points and performance metrics. Colonel Morrison cleared his throat and opened the first folder, revealing photographs that Elena recognized from the Sarajevo operation. The images showed burned vehicles, damaged buildings, and body bags arranged in neat rows that testified to a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. Elena had seen these photographs before, during the initial debriefing sessions that had stretched over weeks of interrogation and analysis, but their impact had not diminished with repetition. The Sarajevo operation had been planned with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that characterized high-stakes missions in politically sensitive environments. Elena had been assigned as primary sniper support for a team tasked with extracting a high-value intelligence asset from the city, where ethnic tensions made any foreign military presence extremely dangerous. The asset possessed information about terrorist networks that threatened multiple NATO countries, making the extraction a priority that justified considerable risk and resource allocation. Elena's position had been established on the 7th floor of an abandoned hotel that provided sightlines to 3 different extraction routes through the city's maze-like streets. Her overwatch responsibilities included neutralizing threats that might emerge during the extraction, providing real-time intelligence about enemy movements, and serving as the team's early warning system for complications that could compromise the entire operation. The positioning had been perfect, offering both tactical advantages and multiple escape routes in case the mission required emergency extraction. The intelligence briefing had identified local militia groups as the primary threat, describing them as poorly trained but heavily armed organizations whose unpredictable behavior made precise threat assessment difficult. Elena had studied their known tactics, equipment capabilities, and leadership structures, preparing for engagement scenarios that might develop with minimal warning. The preparation had seemed thorough, covering all variables that could be anticipated, based on available intelligence and previous operations in similar environments. What the briefing had not included was information about the deep cover operative, who had been feeding information to hostile forces for over 18 months. Agent Marcus Webb had established himself as a trusted member of the extraction team, using his access to operational details to coordinate ambush that would eliminate the intelligence asset while ensuring that blame fell on local militia groups rather than foreign intelligence services. The sophistication of the betrayal would not become apparent until long after the mission had collapsed into chaos. Elena had maintained her overwatch position as the extraction team moved through the city's narrow streets, tracking their progress. Through her scope while scanning for threats that might emerge from the labyrinth of damaged buildings and debris-filled intersections, the team's movement patterns followed the predetermined route exactly, maintaining the kind of tactical discipline that suggested confidence in their intelligence and preparation. Elena had felt the familiar combination of alertness and calm that characterized successful missions, watching her teammates perform with the precision that came from extensive training and mutual trust. The first indication of trouble had been a radio transmission that lasted 3 seconds longer than protocol allowed, followed by a request for route clarification that should not have been necessary given the team's extensive preparation. Elena had noted the anomaly but filed it as a minor deviation rather than a warning sign of deeper problems. Her training had taught her to distinguish between significant threats and the kind of minor irregularities that occurred during even well-executed operations. The ambush had been triggered with timing that suggested intimate knowledge of the team's movement patterns and communication protocols. Elena had watched through her scope as explosive devices detonated with precision that eliminated escape routes while channeling the survivors into prepared killing zones where enemy fire could achieve maximum effectiveness. The coordination required for such an attack exceeded the capabilities that intelligence assessments had attributed to local militia groups, indicating a level of planning and resource allocation that suggested professional military involvement. Elena's immediate response had been to engage the ambush positions she could identify from her elevated position, using her rifle to eliminate threats that were directly engaging her trapped teammates. Her shots had been accurate, each one precisely placed to neutralize specific threats, without risking friendly fire incidents in the confused tactical environment below. The suppressive fire had provided brief respites that allowed some team members to reach better defensive positions, though the overall tactical situation continued to deteriorate despite her efforts. The extraction team's radio communications had become increasingly fragmented as casualties mounted and equipment failures degraded their coordination capabilities. Elena had maintained contact with the team leader until his radio went silent during a particularly intense exchange of fire, leaving her without direct communication with the people she was supposed to be supporting. Her attempts to establish contact with other team members had produced only static and brief transmissions that provided no clear picture of the situation on the ground. Elena's position had eventually attracted counter-sniper fire from locations that she had not been able to identify during her initial reconnaissance of the area. The incoming rounds had been precisely aimed, forcing her to abandon her primary firing position and seek alternative cover within the abandoned hotel. The accuracy of the hostile fire suggested professional training and equipment capabilities that exceeded the known characteristics of local militia forces, adding another layer of complexity to a situation that had already moved beyond the parameters of the original mission planning. The decision to maintain her position rather than attempting immediate extraction had been based on her assessment that the trapped team members still required overwatch support and that her withdrawal might eliminate their last hope of survival. Elena had established a secondary firing position that provided limited visibility but maintained some capability to engage threats that continued to target her teammates. The new position offered less tactical advantage but kept her within the operational area where she might still contribute to a successful outcome. Marcus Webb had used the confusion of the ongoing firefight to eliminate the intelligence asset with a precision that ensured the death would be attributed to enemy action rather than betrayal within the team itself. The assassination had been accomplished with timing that suggested intimate knowledge of the asset's location and the tactical situation that would provide cover for the killing. Elena had been too engaged with immediate threats to observe the murder directly, though she would later analyze radio transmissions that captured Webb's final communication with his foreign handlers. The arrival of local authorities had complicated the tactical situation by introducing additional armed forces whose intentions and capabilities remained unclear. Elena had observed police units establishing perimeters that seemed designed more to contain the situation than to assist the extraction team, suggesting either coordination with hostile forces or a deliberate policy of non-interference that served enemy interests. The police presence had effectively eliminated several potential escape routes while providing no apparent benefit to the trapped American personnel. Elena's ammunition supply had been carefully managed throughout the engagement, though the extended firefight had consumed more resources than originally anticipated. Each shot had been evaluated for its tactical necessity and potential impact on the overall situation, with priority given to threats that directly endangered team members who remained capable of movement and communication. The discipline required to maintain such precision while under sustained hostile fire represented the pinnacle of professional sniper training and experience. The final phase of the operation had deteriorated into a series of individual survival scenarios as the extraction team's cohesion collapsed under the weight of casualties and equipment failures. Elena had maintained overwatch support for as long as possible, though her ability to influence the tactical situation had been gradually reduced by the combination of limited ammunition, restricted fields of fire, and the increasing sophistication of counter-sniper efforts directed against her position. The decision to withdraw had been delayed until it became clear that further engagement would not improve the survival prospects of her remaining teammates. Elena's extraction from the abandoned hotel had required skills that extended beyond conventional sniper training, involving urban evasion techniques and the kind of improvised problem-solving that characterized special operations personnel operating in denied environments. She had moved through the building's interior spaces to avoid observation from the street level, using maintenance passages and structural features to reach alternative exit points that had not been covered by hostile surveillance. The withdrawal had been conducted with extreme care to avoid compromise that might lead pursuit back to safe houses or other assets. The walk to the emergency rally point had taken Elena through sections of the city that revealed the broader context of the conflict that had claimed her teammates' lives. Damaged buildings and abandoned vehicles testified to violence that had been ongoing for months, creating conditions where foreign military operations became exponentially more dangerous and politically sensitive. Elena had understood that her team's mission represented just one small component of much larger, strategic considerations that remained classified far beyond her access level. The emergency communication protocols had functioned as designed, allowing Elena to establish contact with extraction assets that had been pre-positioned to handle exactly this kind of mission failure. The brief radio conversation had been conducted using codes that confirmed her identity, while avoiding detailed discussion of the tactical situation that had led to the team's destruction. Elena had provided grid coordinates for emergency pickup, while requesting immediate evacuation that would minimize her exposure to continued hostile surveillance and potential capture. The helicopter extraction had been conducted with the kind of professional efficiency that characterized special operations aviation units, though the aircrew's expressions had made clear their understanding that they were recovering a sole survivor, rather than a successful team. Elena had boarded the aircraft without ceremony, settling into the web seating while medical personnel conducted preliminary assessments to determine whether she required immediate treatment for injuries that might have been obscured by adrenaline and shock. The flight back to the forward operating base had provided Elena with time to begin processing the tactical and emotional implications of the mission's failure, though the full scope of the disaster would not become clear until formal debriefing sessions revealed the extent of the intelligence compromise that had made success impossible from the beginning. The rhythmic sound of the helicopter's rotors had provided a mechanical counterpoint to Elena's mental review of decisions that might have been made differently if complete information had been available. The initial debriefing sessions had been conducted by officers whose questions suggested suspicion about Elena's survival when so many experienced operators had died in the same engagement. The inquiries had focused on her tactical decisions, her adherence to established protocols, and her assessment of factors that might have contributed to the mission's failure. Elena had answered each question with the kind of precise detail that her training had taught her to maintain even under psychological pressure, designed to reveal inconsistencies or deceptions. Colonel Morrison's voice brought Elena back to the present moment in Conference Room Delta, where her future was being decided by people who had never faced the kind of impossible choices that combat operations sometimes demanded. The colonel was reading from a report that described her actions in Sarajevo, using language that transformed tactical decisions into evidence of incompetence or insubordination. Each paragraph was constructed to support a narrative that would justify the punishment that had already been decided by authorities, whose reasoning remained opaque to Elena. The report detailed Elena's decision to maintain her overwatch position after radio contact with the team leader had been lost, describing it as a failure to follow extraction protocols, rather than an attempt to provide continued support to surviving team members. Her engagement of hostile forces had been characterized as excessive and poorly coordinated, though no alternative courses of action had been suggested that might have improved the tactical outcome. The analysis seemed designed more to assign blame than to extract lessons that might prevent similar failures in future operations. Elena's ammunition expenditure had been calculated with precision that ignored the tactical realities of urban combat, suggesting that her resource management indicated poor planning rather than adaptation to rapidly changing circumstances. The report's authors had apparently expected her to maintain peacetime standards of efficiency while engaging multiple threats in an environment where split-second decisions determined life or death outcomes. The disconnect between theoretical expectations and combat realities suggested that the investigating officers possessed limited experience with the kind of operations they were evaluating. The timeline reconstruction had been based primarily on radio intercepts and surveillance data that provided an incomplete picture of the tactical situation Elena had faced during the extended engagement. Critical gaps in the available information had been filled with assumptions that consistently favored interpretations that supported predetermined conclusions about her performance. Elena recognized the methodology from previous investigations, where political considerations had been more important than factual accuracy in determining final outcomes. Marcus Webb's role in the mission's failure had been carefully omitted from the official report, though Elena knew that his betrayal had been documented through intelligence channels that operated independently of the formal investigation process. The decision to classify his involvement apparently reflected concerns about revealing counterintelligence capabilities that might prove valuable in future operations. Elena's teammates had died because of Webb's treachery, but their sacrifice would remain unacknowledged to protect secrets that their superiors considered more important than truth or justice. The psychological evaluation that formed part of the investigation had been conducted by a psychiatrist who specialized in determining whether military personnel possessed the emotional stability required for continued service in high-stress environments. Elena's responses to standardized questions had been analyzed for signs of post-traumatic stress, survivor guilt, or other conditions that might compromise her effectiveness in future operations. The evaluation's conclusions had been written to support the administrative actions that would effectively end her military career. Elena's service record had been re-examined with the kind of scrutiny that inevitably revealed minor infractions and judgment calls that could be reinterpreted as evidence of a pattern of problematic behavior. Incidents that had been considered unremarkable during their original occurrence had been elevated to significance that supported broader narratives about her suitability for continued military service. The retrospective analysis ignored the context that had made such incidents routine rather than exceptional during her years of operational deployments. The formal charges that would have led to court-martial proceedings had been carefully constructed to ensure conviction while avoiding the kind of detailed evidence presentation that might reveal classified information about the Sarajevo operation. Elena's legal counsel had advised her that fighting the charges would require accepting risks that extended far beyond her personal situation, potentially compromising ongoing operations and endangering personnel whose safety depended on maintaining operational security. The choice between personal vindication and broader operational considerations had not been difficult to make. Colonel Morrison closed the first folder and opened a second one that contained personnel evaluations spanning Elena's entire military career. The documents revealed a consistent pattern of exceptional performance ratings, commendations for actions that had exceeded normal duty requirements, and recommendations for advanced training that reflected her superior's confidence in her abilities and potential. The contrast between her historical record and the current proceedings was stark enough to suggest that factors beyond professional competence were influencing the investigation's conclusions. The second officer, whose nameplate identified him as Major Reynolds, began reading from Elena's psychological profile with particular attention to assessments that suggested strong individual initiative and willingness to make independent decisions in ambiguous tactical situations. These characteristics had been consistently identified as strengths during her earlier career, though they were now being presented as evidence of the kind of insubordination that made her unsuitable for continued military service. The reinterpretation suggested that her superior's priorities had shifted in ways that made her previous assets into current liabilities. Elena's training records documented thousands of hours of specialized instruction in skills that represented significant military investment and were not easily replaced when experienced personnel were removed from active service. The marksmanship scores, tactical evaluations, and leadership assessments painted a picture of someone whose capabilities had been developed through years of expensive preparation for roles that very few people could fill effectively. The institutional knowledge and practical experience she represented would be difficult to replace, regardless of the reasons for her separation from service. The final folder contained communications intercepts and surveillance reports that Elena had not seen before, though their existence did not surprise her given the level of scrutiny that had surrounded the Sarajevo investigation. The documents revealed the extent to which her personal and professional activities had been monitored during the months following the mission, apparently in search of evidence that might support broader theories about her reliability and loyalty. The surveillance had found nothing that raised legitimate security concerns, though its existence demonstrated the lengths to which her superiors had gone to justify predetermined conclusions. Major Reynolds looked up from the files and made direct eye contact with Elena for the first time since the proceedings had begun. His expression revealed nothing about his personal opinions regarding the administrative actions being taken, though his manner suggested familiarity with similar cases where individual careers had been sacrificed to serve broader institutional interests. Elena recognized the look of someone who had been assigned an unpleasant but necessary task that required professional detachment from its human consequences. The offer that followed was delivered in the kind of neutral language that legal documents use to disguise coercion as choice. Elena could accept voluntary resignation from active duty with full benefits and honorable discharge status, avoiding the court-martial proceedings that might result in imprisonment and permanent damage to her reputation and future prospects. The alternative was fighting charges that had been carefully constructed to ensure conviction, while protecting classified information that might provide her with effective defense strategies. Elena's response had been prepared during the sleepless nights she had spent analyzing her options and consulting with legal counsel, whose advice had been consistent and unambiguous. She would accept resignation rather than subjecting her former teammates, families to the publicity that would accompany court-martial proceedings, and rather than forcing the disclosure of classified information that might compromise ongoing operations. The decision represented acceptance of personal injustice in service of larger considerations that remained more important than individual vindication. The paperwork had been completed with administrative efficiency that suggested extensive preparation for this specific outcome. Elena's security clearances were revoked immediately, her access to military facilities was terminated, and her transition to civilian status was processed through channels that specialized in handling personnel, whose separation involved classified operations. The entire process was designed to minimize publicity while ensuring that Elena's departure would not create precedents that might encourage similar challenges to military authority in future cases. Elena's final day in uniform had been spent clearing personal items from her quarters and completing administrative requirements that marked the official end of her military service. The other personnel she encountered during this process had maintained professional courtesy while avoiding the kind of personal conversations that might have acknowledged the injustice of her situation. Elena understood that her colleagues' silence reflected their own vulnerability within systems that punished association with the officially disgraced. The transition to civilian life had been facilitated by organizations that specialized in helping former military personnel whose separation had occurred under circumstances that made conventional employment opportunities difficult to obtain. Elena's skills remained valuable to private security contractors and consulting firms, whose work operated in areas where government agencies preferred to maintain plausible deniability. The compensation offered by such employers often exceeded military pay scales, though the work involved risks and moral complexities that government service had attempted to regulate through official oversight mechanisms. Elena's first civilian assignment had been conducting security assessments for corporate facilities in regions where political instability made conventional business operations dangerous. The work utilized her tactical expertise while avoiding the kind of direct action missions that might have created conflicts with her former military obligations. The clients appreciated her professionalism and discretion, leading to referrals that established her reputation within networks of specialists who operated in the spaces between official government activities and purely commercial enterprises. The psychological adjustment to contractor status had required Elena to recalibrate her understanding of loyalty, accountability, and professional identity. Military service had provided clear chains of command and institutional frameworks that defined appropriate behavior and acceptable risk levels. Civilian contracting operated according to more flexible arrangements where individual judgment played larger roles in determining mission parameters and acceptable outcomes. Elena had learned to navigate these differences while maintaining the ethical standards that had guided her military service. The intelligence communities and formal networks had provided Elena with opportunities to utilize her specialized skills in ways that served national security interests without requiring official acknowledgement or institutional oversight. These assignments were communicated through intermediaries who maintained separation between decision-makers and operational personnel, ensuring that political consequences would not directly impact the people responsible for mission planning and authorization. Elena's participation in such activities reflected her continued commitment to protecting interests that transcended her personal grievances with military bureaucracy. Her reputation within these networks had grown through successful completion of assignments that other contractors had found too difficult or too dangerous to undertake effectively. Elena's combination of technical skills, operational experience, and personal reliability made her valuable to organizations that operated in environments where failure could result in significant political or economic consequences. The work provided both professional satisfaction and financial compensation that exceeded what military service had offered, though it came with isolation that was more complete than anything she had experienced in official capacities. The 3 years that followed Elena's separation from military service had been spent building relationships and capabilities that existed entirely outside official channels, creating alternative career paths that utilized her training while avoiding the institutional constraints that had ultimately led to her dismissal. She had developed expertise in areas that complemented her military background, including languages, cultural knowledge, and technical skills that increased her value to clients who operated in challenging international environments. The continuous learning had provided intellectual stimulation while maintaining the kind of professional growth that kept her capabilities current with evolving threats and opportunities. Elena's personal relationships had been carefully managed to avoid complications that might arise from the classified nature of much of her work or the irregular schedules that characterized contractor assignments. She had maintained contact with former military colleagues who had also transitioned to civilian careers, though these relationships were constrained by security considerations that prevented detailed discussion of current activities. The isolation was a necessary cost of maintaining the operational security that protected both her own safety and the interests of her clients. The financial security that contractor work provided had allowed Elena to establish the kind of independent lifestyle that military service had never permitted, though the freedom came with responsibilities that required constant attention to personal security and legal compliance. She had learned to manage complex tax obligations, insurance requirements, and regulatory compliance issues that were handled automatically for military personnel, but became individual responsibilities. For contractors, the administrative burden was significant, but manageable with appropriate professional assistance. Elena's current mission represented a return to the kind of high-stakes operation that had characterized the most challenging aspects of her military service, though the client relationships and legal frameworks were entirely different from those that had governed her previous work. The target's profile and the remote location suggested that this assignment involved political considerations that extended far beyond routine security consulting, requiring the kind of specialized capabilities that very few contractors could provide effectively. Elena had accepted the mission, knowing that its completion might have consequences that she was not authorized to fully understand. The communication device clipped to her vest had remained silent throughout her mental review of the path that had brought her to this mountain, though she knew that instructions would eventually come that would determine how this assignment would conclude. Elena had learned patience during her years of military service, and the civilian contracts that followed had reinforced the importance of maintaining readiness while waiting for developments that remained outside her direct control. The scopes crosshairs remained steady on the target compound, ready to transform from observation tool to instrument of judgment when the moment arrived. Colonel Morrison's voice had provided the final administrative formalities that officially ended Elena's military career, though the real conclusion had occurred months earlier when the decision to sacrifice her reputation had been made by authorities, whose reasoning remained classified beyond her access level. The proceedings in Conference Room Delta had been theater designed to provide official legitimacy for actions that had already been determined through processes that operated outside normal administrative channels. Elena had participated in the performance while understanding its true purpose and accepting its inevitability. The transition from Conference Room Delta to her current position on Mount Kestrel represented more than just a change in employment or geographic location. Elena had moved from systems that claimed to value truth and justice while sacrificing both to protect institutional interests, to arrangements where effectiveness and discretion were the primary measures of professional worth. The change had required fundamental adjustments to her understanding of loyalty, accountability, and the relationship between individual actions and larger strategic considerations. Elena's current assignment would test not only her technical skills and operational experience, but also her ability to make decisions that might contradict official instructions if circumstances revealed information that had not been available. During mission planning, the freedom to exercise independent judgment was both a privilege and a burden that came with contractor status, requiring constant evaluation of competing priorities and potential consequences that might extend far beyond immediate tactical considerations. Elena had learned to accept this responsibility while maintaining the ethical standards that had guided her throughout her professional career. The mountain's silence was broken only by the sound of wind moving through stone passages and the distant cry of birds that hunted in the alpine environment. Elena had grown comfortable with solitude during her years of independent operation, finding that isolation often provided clarity that was difficult to achieve in environments filled with competing voices and conflicting agendas. The scope's view of the target compound remained clear and steady, awaiting developments that would determine whether observation would transform into action, and whether Elena's current mission would end in successful completion or in complications that would require improvisation skills she had developed through years of operating without institutional support. The communication device pulsed once against her vest, indicating that the waiting period was approaching its end and that decisions made by people she would never meet were about to determine the next phase of an operation that had brought her back to the kind of high-stakes environment where her specialized skills remained relevant despite the institutional betrayal that had driven her from official service. Elena prepared to receive instructions that would test everything she had learned during her years in exile, knowing that her response would reflect not only her technical capabilities, but also the ethical framework she had maintained despite abandonment by systems that claimed to share her values. The communication device crackled to life with a burst of encrypted static that resolved into a voice Elena had not heard in 3 years. The transmission was brief, clinical, and carried the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders that would be followed without question. Target confirmed. Priority Alpha. Execute immediately. The words hung in the mountain air like a death sentence waiting to be carried out. Elena adjusted her scope's focus, bringing the compound into sharp relief. The figure standing near the main entrance was clearly visible now, and the recognition hit her like a physical blow. Major Sarah Chen, officially killed in action during a classified operation in Eastern Europe, stood alive and apparently well, directing what appeared to be a humanitarian aid distribution. The woman Elena had been ordered to eliminate was her former commanding officer, the person who had recommended her for advanced sniper training, and someone she had considered both a mentor and friend. Chen moved with the same confident bearing Elena remembered from their shared deployments, though her civilian clothing and the relaxed atmosphere of the compound suggested a dramatic transformation from her previous military identity. She was coordinating the unloading of medical supplies from vehicles that bore no military markings, working alongside people who appeared to be genuine refugees rather than combatants. The scene bore no resemblance to the terrorist stronghold described in Elena's mission briefing. The scope's magnification allowed Elena to observe details that contradicted everything she had been told about this target. Children played near the compound's perimeter while adults engaged in activities that suggested a community rather than a military installation. Elena counted at least 30 civilians, including elderly individuals and families with young children, all of whom seemed comfortable and secure in their surroundings. Whatever this place was, it was not the terrorist training facility that had been described in her operational briefing. Elena's training demanded immediate execution of the kill order, but her professional instincts recognized intelligence failures that could have catastrophic consequences if acted upon without verification. The disconnect between briefing materials and observed reality suggested either massive intelligence errors or deliberate deception, designed to eliminate Chen for reasons that had nothing to do with legitimate security threats. Elena made a decision that would define the remainder of her career and possibly her life. Instead of firing, she activated a backup communication channel that operated outside official monitoring systems. The frequency had been established years earlier as an emergency protocol for situations where standard command structures might be compromised. Elena transmitted a brief coded message that would alert Chen to the presence of hostile surveillance, without revealing her specific location or intentions. The decision represented a fundamental break with her current employers and a return to loyalties that had been forged through shared combat experiences. Chen's reaction was immediate and telling. Rather than panic or confusion, she displayed the kind of calm professionalism that Elena remembered from their military service together. Chen began issuing quiet instructions that resulted in the rapid but orderly evacuation of civilians from the compound's exposed areas. The response demonstrated tactical awareness that suggested Chen understood exactly what kind of threat she faced and had prepared contingencies for this specific scenario. Elena maintained visual contact while processing the implications of what she was observing. If Chen had faked her own death, she had done so with resources and planning that indicated support from sophisticated intelligence networks. The compound's location and defensive preparations suggested long-term planning and significant financial backing. Most importantly, the presence of genuine refugees indicated that Chen's current activities, whatever their ultimate purpose, involved protecting vulnerable people rather than threatening them. The realization that she had been manipulated into targeting a humanitarian operation rather than a terrorist facility filled Elena with a cold rage that she channeled into professional focus. Someone with significant authority had provided false intelligence designed to eliminate Chun while using Elena as an unwitting instrument of assassination. The sophistication of the deception suggested involvement by intelligence agencies with capabilities that exceeded normal military or law enforcement. Resources. Elena's communication device buzzed with increasingly urgent demands for confirmation of target elimination. The messages became more threatening as her silence continued, eventually including references to consequences that would extend beyond simple employment termination. Elena recognized the escalation as evidence that her employers were deeply committed to Chun's elimination and would likely take extreme measures to ensure mission completion if Elena continued to refuse compliance. The decision to abandon her position and make direct contact with Chun represented a complete break with operational protocols and professional obligations to her current employers. Elena began the careful process of extracting from her mountain perch while maintaining surveillance of the compound below. The descent would require several hours of careful movement through terrain that offered minimal concealment from observers who might be monitoring her activities. Elena reached the compound's perimeter as darkness settled over the mountain valley. The facility's security was professional but not excessive, suggesting preparation for threats without the paranoia that characterized truly dangerous organizations. Elena identified herself through methods that would be familiar to anyone with shared military experience, eventually gaining access to the compound through guards who recognized her name and reputation despite the years that had passed since their last contact. The reunion with Chun was subdued but emotionally charged, taking place in a small office where maps and communication equipment suggested ongoing coordination of activities that extended far beyond this single location. Chun's appearance had changed little despite the years and the supposed death that had removed her from official records. Her manner remained the same combination of professional competence and personal warmth that had made her an effective leader during their military service. Chun's explanation of her current circumstances was delivered with the directness that Elena remembered from their shared operations. The classified mission that had reportedly resulted in her death had actually exposed corruption within intelligence agencies that were selling weapons to terrorist organizations while maintaining official policies of counter-terrorism cooperation. Chun's discovery of these activities had made her a target for elimination, forcing her to disappear from official records while continuing to work against the network she had identified. The compound served as a coordination center for activities that disrupted illegal arms trafficking while providing humanitarian assistance to people displaced by conflicts that were often funded and prolonged by the same intelligence agencies that claimed to be working for peace and stability. Chun's network included former military personnel who had been similarly betrayed by systems they had served faithfully, creating an informal organization that operated according to the ethical standards that official agencies had abandoned in favor of political expediency. Elena learned that her current mission was part of a broader campaign to eliminate personnel who possessed knowledge of intelligence community corruption that extended to the highest levels of government. The false briefing materials had been carefully crafted to ensure that Elena would eliminate Chen without understanding the true reasons for the assignment, protecting the people who had ordered the assassination while utilizing Elena's skills and reputation to ensure successful completion. The revelation that she had been manipulated by the same intelligence networks that had destroyed her military career filled Elena with determination to prevent the completion of her assigned mission. While exposing the corruption that had made such operations possible, Chun provided access to documentation that proved the existence of illegal arms sales, assassination programs targeting whistleblowers, and systematic cover-ups that had prevented accountability for activities that violated both domestic and international law. Elena's decision to join Chun's network represented more than simple revenge against systems that had betrayed her. The humanitarian work being conducted at the compound provided opportunities to use her skills in ways that protected innocent people rather than advancing political agendas that benefited from continued conflict and instability. The work offered meaning that had been absent from her contractor assignments, restoring a sense of purpose that had been lost when her military career ended. The immediate challenge was dealing with Elena's former employers, who would certainly attempt to eliminate both her and Chun when they realized that the assassination mission had failed. Elena's knowledge of their methods and resources would be crucial in developing countermeasures that might prevent successful follow-up operations. The mountain compound's defensive preparations would need to be enhanced significantly to withstand attacks by professional teams with access to sophisticated equipment and unlimited resources. Elena's transformation from isolated contractor to member of a principled organization fighting against systemic corruption represented a return to the values that had originally motivated her military service. The work was dangerous and offered no official recognition or institutional protection, but it provided opportunities to make differences that would benefit people who had no other sources of protection against forces that operated beyond legal accountability. Chun's network had already saved hundreds of lives by disrupting arms shipments that would have fueled conflicts in regions where civilian populations were most vulnerable to violence. The work required constant vigilance and adaptation to counter intelligence agencies that possessed nearly unlimited resources and legal immunity for activities that would be considered criminal if conducted by private citizens. Elena's skills and experience would significantly enhance the network's capabilities, while providing her with the kind of meaningful work that had been absent from her contractor career. The mountain compound would need to be abandoned soon, as Elena's former employers would certainly attempt to locate and destroy it once they realized that their assassination mission had failed. The evacuation would require careful coordination to ensure that the refugees currently being sheltered could be relocated to safe areas without compromising the security of other network facilities. Elena's tactical expertise would be crucial in planning withdrawal operations that minimized risks to vulnerable civilians. Elena's rehabilitation was complete. From a betrayed soldier abandoned by institutions she had served faithfully, she had become part of an organization that embodied the principles she had always believed were worth defending. The work was difficult and dangerous, but it offered the kind of moral clarity that had been absent from both her military service and contractor career. She had found her purpose in protecting people who had no other defenders against systems that prioritized political convenience over human dignity. The communication device that had once carried orders from corrupt employers now served to coordinate activities that saved lives and exposed truths that powerful people preferred to keep hidden. Elena's sniper skills remained relevant, but they were now employed to protect humanitarian workers rather than eliminate targets whose only crime was possessing inconvenient knowledge about institutional corruption. She had become the kind of operator she had always aspired to be, one whose actions were guided by conscience rather than orders. The mountain silence that had once isolated Elena now represented freedom from systems that had demanded unthinking obedience to morally compromised authority figures. She had found colleagues who shared her commitment to protecting innocent people and exposing corrupt practices, creating the kind of professional relationships that had been impossible within institutions that punished ethical behavior while rewarding compliance with illegal orders. Her exile had ended, replaced by membership in a community that valued her contributions while respecting her autonomy. The future would bring new challenges as intelligence agencies adapted their methods to counter the network's activities. But Elena faced these prospects with confidence that came from working alongside people who shared her values and commitment to making positive differences in a world where official channels had been compromised by corruption and political expediency. She had found her place in the struggle between conscience and convenience, choosing the more difficult path that led toward justice rather than profit. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.